At his son's funeral, Millionaire finds a homeless girl no one knew. Her secret shocked him too. Before starting to watch this story, tell us in the comments section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. The sky over Seattle was a heavy gray that afternoon, as if even the heavens were mourning. People stood gathered under a wide white canopy outside St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral, their black coats dotted with cold raindrops. Among the mourners, the air was thick with grief, the kind that clung to your skin and found its way into your bones. Michael Reeves, a man who built his empire from scratch in the tech corridors of Bellevue, stood by the mahogany casket of his only son Ethan. At 52, Michael had achieved everything he ever dreamed of: fortune, recognition, even respect. But in that moment he realized he had failed in the one place that truly mattered: being a father. Ethan was only 25, full of potential, and now gone. The reason behind his death kept politely vague among the attendees. Michael didn't care to correct them. Ethan had died alone in a car accident late one night, leaving a trail of questions Michael would never get answers to. People he barely knew approached him with soft words and heavy looks, but Michael only nodded, his mind elsewhere. It was during one of these mechanical exchanges that his eyes caught something unusual. Just beyond the formal line of mourners, standing awkwardly near the tree line, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 17, her clothes soaked and clinging to her thin frame. A battered backpack was slung over one shoulder, and her shoes were muddy as if she had walked miles to be there. She was crying, not the silent, restrained tears of the people around him, but a raw, uncontrollable grief, like a wound torn open. Michael stared. He didn't recognize her. Neither did anyone else, judging by the cautious glances she was attracting. Something in the girl's expression hooked into him, sharp and immediate. It wasn't just sadness, it was devastation. Before he could approach her, the final prayers were said, and people began drifting toward their cars. The girl remained rooted to the spot, her face buried in her hands, shivering slightly under the cold drizzle. Michael hesitated. His chauffeur was already waiting with the car door open, a quiet signal to leave, but he couldn't move. He kept his eyes on the girl, and for a fleeting second she looked up, and their gazes locked. There was a flicker of recognition in her tear-swollen eyes, as if she had known Ethan in a way even Michael hadn't. He started toward her, but a group of family friends intercepted him, offering condolences, hugging him stiffly. When he finally broke free and turned back, the girl was gone. He searched the grounds briefly, ignoring the curious looks from those who noticed him wandering, but there was no trace of her, just a few muddy footprints leading toward the road and disappearing into the city beyond. That night, Michael sat alone in his sprawling, silent house overlooking Lake Washington, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. He barely noticed the modern art on the walls, the polished marble floors, the fireplace flickering warmly, all things that had once been a source of pride, now nothing but meaningless decorations in a mausoleum. His mind kept returning to the girl. Who was she? How had she known Ethan? Why had she been crying like that? He told himself to forget it. People showed up to funerals all the time, strangers, the curious, those who needed closure for their own reasons. But deep down he knew this was different. Ethan had been complicated, private. There were pieces of his life Michael had never bothered to understand, too busy closing deals, taking meetings, expanding companies. His relationship with his son had been reduced to occasional phone calls, terse holidays, and the silent acknowledgement that they lived in two different worlds. Now he feared those worlds had been even farther apart than he realized. Unable to sleep, Michael did something he hadn't done in years. He picked up the phone and called a private investigator. Jake Nolan had once found a missing server who had stolen company secrets. He was discreet, effective, and expensive, qualities Michael appreciated. After explaining everything in a low voice, he ended the call with a simple command: find her. Then he stared out the window into the dark, rain-soaked night, feeling an ache that no amount of money could ever fix. Morning came slowly with a weak sun struggling through the clouds. Michael sat at the kitchen table, an untouched breakfast cooling in front of him. His phone buzzed once, a message from Jake. No results yet, but he had security footage from St. Mark's to analyze. Michael wondered if it would even help. A homeless teenager slipping into a funeral didn't exactly leave a trail. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that finding her was important, maybe even necessary. Maybe it would help him understand who Ethan had really been. Maybe it would help him forgive himself. Late that afternoon, Michael returned to the cathedral. He spoke to the staff, the groundskeepers, anyone who might have noticed her. Most shrugged apologetically. One older woman who volunteered with the church pantry thought she might have seen a girl matching that description at a nearby homeless shelter a few weeks ago. Columbia Shelter, down in the Central District. Michael left immediately, driving himself through the rainy streets, ignoring every text and call that came through. When he arrived, the shelter was busy, loud, filled with people who had nowhere else to go. The smell of damp clothing and canned soup filled the air. He showed the receptionist a printed-out photo from the funeral security footage, a grainy image of the girl huddled near a tree. The woman's eyes softened. "Yeah," she said slowly. "That's Emily. She comes around sometimes. But she's not here right now. She drifts around Pioneer Square mostly." Michael wrote the name down carefully. Emily. It felt like the first real clue in the endless, echoing void Ethan had left behind. As he drove back toward downtown, he wondered what secrets this mysterious girl was carrying, and why they had led her to cry harder for Ethan than Michael ever could. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The next morning, the sky over Seattle was still a muted, reluctant gray. Michael Reeves sat in his black BMW, parked near Occidental Park in Pioneer Square, a place he hadn't set foot in for at least 2 decades. This part of the city was a different world from the gleaming skyscrapers where he had made his fortune. Here, the benches were often occupied by men and women wrapped in worn blankets, their faces lined by hardship. Street musicians played soft, mournful tunes while food trucks served hurried lunches to tourists who quickly looked away from the homeless gathered nearby. Michael felt strangely out of place, his tailored suit and polished shoes almost mocking the struggle around him. But none of that mattered. He was here for one reason: Emily. The girl who cried at his son's funeral like she had lost a part of her soul. The girl who might hold answers to questions that were gnawing at his heart. Jake had texted him an hour ago. One of his guys had spotted a girl matching Emily's description near an alley behind a bookstore on Main Street. Michael got out of his car, the chill wind cutting through his coat. His steps were brisk, his breath visible in short puffs. As he turned the corner, he spotted her. Emily was sitting cross-legged against a brick wall, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest. She wore the same worn jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days. Her head was bowed, a curtain of dirty blonde hair covering her face. Michael hesitated. How did one approach a homeless teenager without scaring her away? He wasn't good at this. He had built companies, crushed negotiations, managed billion-dollar deals. But standing here about to speak to a girl who had nothing, he felt as unsure as a child. He took a few cautious steps forward. "Emily?" he said, his voice soft but firm. She looked up instantly, her eyes wide, her body tensing like a trapped animal. For a moment, Michael thought she would bolt. But then she recognized him. Something flickered in her expression. Fear maybe. Guilt. Grief. It was hard to tell. "I'm Michael," he said, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "Ethan's father." The name seemed to hit her like a slap. She turned her face away, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I don't want trouble," she mumbled. "I'm not trying to cause problems." "You're not in trouble," Michael said carefully, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. I saw you at Ethan's funeral. I think you knew him. I need to understand." Emily hugged her knees tighter, rocking slightly. She didn't speak for a long time. The sounds of the city filled the silence between them, honking cars, distant chatter, the clatter of a passing skateboarder. Finally she spoke, her voice hoarse. "He was my friend." She looked up at him, and in that moment Michael saw it, the same raw, real sadness he had glimpsed at the funeral. Not staged, not forced. It was real. "He helped me," she said, "when no one else even saw me." Michael felt a lump forming in his throat. "How?" he asked, his voice rough. Emily glanced around nervously. "Not here," she whispered. "Too many people. Too many eyes." Michael hesitated only for a second before pulling out his wallet and offering her a card. "I'm staying at the Four Seasons," he said. "Room 917. If you want to talk, come find me. I just want the truth. About Ethan." She took the card as if it might burn her fingers. For a moment, their eyes met again, an invisible agreement passing between them. Then Michael stood and walked away, his heart pounding strangely in his chest. Back at the hotel he couldn't sit still. His suite overlooked Elliott Bay, but the beauty of the view barely registered. Hours dragged by, each minute stretching painfully. Doubts crept in. Maybe she wouldn't come. Maybe she was just another lost soul looking for someone to blame for their own broken life. Maybe he was wasting time chasing ghosts. But deep inside he knew better. Ethan had always been different, even as a child. Kind-hearted, stubborn about helping people, uninterested in wealth or appearances. And Michael had never taken the time to understand why. A little after 9 that evening, there was a knock at the door. Michael crossed the room quickly, half expecting it to be room service or Jake checking in. But when he opened the door, there she was, Emily. She had changed into a slightly cleaner sweatshirt, and someone had given her a dry pair of sneakers. She clutched her backpack like a lifeline. Wordlessly, Michael stepped aside, letting her in. She stood awkwardly near the door, refusing to sit on the expensive furniture, as if afraid she might dirty it just by being near. "Would you like something to eat?" Michael offered. She nodded hesitantly. He ordered room service, burgers and fries, the kind of food he remembered Ethan liking. While they waited, they sat in silence. Michael didn't push. He could see she was building up the courage to talk. When the food arrived, Emily devoured her burger with the kind of hunger that made Michael's chest ache. How long had it been since she had eaten properly? After a few minutes, she wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her sweatshirt and finally looked at him properly. "Ethan was my friend," she began, voice trembling slightly. "But not just that. He saved me." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Saved you how?" She swallowed hard. "I was living in my car. I had nowhere to go. My stepfather kicked me out, and my mom, she didn't care enough to stop him. I was 16. I was scared. I was hungry. One night, it was pouring rain and I was sitting outside a diner in Capitol Hill, crying. Ethan was inside. He came out, gave me his jacket and bought me dinner. He didn't treat me like I was garbage. He talked to me like a person." Michael closed his eyes briefly, the image burning into his mind. His son quietly helping someone without telling a soul. "He gave me a phone," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He got me a job washing dishes at a cafe. He checked in on me every week. Made sure I had food, a place to sleep. He never judged me. He just cared." Tears ran down her cheeks now, but she didn't wipe them away. "I loved him," she whispered. Michael felt a tear sliding down his own face, unnoticed. For the first time, he realized that the parts of Ethan he had missed were the parts that truly mattered. Sitting across from this broken girl, he finally saw his son, not the polished Ivy League graduate, not the heir to a fortune, but a young man who had loved deeply and lived humbly, in ways his father had never understood. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The city lights of Seattle shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Michael barely noticed. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of Emily's words pressing down on him like an invisible hand. She sat curled up on the edge of the couch, hugging a pillow, her thin frame lost in the oversized hoodie she wore. For a long time neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and aching memories. Finally, Michael cleared his throat, the words rough as they came out. "You said Ethan saved you," he began carefully. "But why were you at his funeral? How did you even know about it?" Emily shifted uncomfortably, her fingers pulling at a loose thread on the pillow. "I heard," she said after a long pause. "People on the street talk. News travels faster than you'd think. Someone said a young guy, a good guy, had been found, gone." Her voice cracked slightly. "When they said his name, I knew." She looked up at Michael with hollow eyes. "I needed to say goodbye." Michael felt a pang deep in his chest. He had always believed funerals were for the living, not the dead. But looking at Emily, he realized some goodbyes carried a weight heavier than any he had ever known. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, biting her lips so hard it turned white. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You can trust me," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. After what felt like an eternity, Emily nodded. She reached into her battered backpack and pulled out a worn leather notebook, its edges frayed, its cover stained by water and time. She held it out to Michael with trembling hands. "He gave this to me," she said in a choked whisper. Michael took the notebook carefully, feeling its unexpected weight in his palms. On the first page, written in Ethan's familiar, messy handwriting, was a simple note, "For Emily. So you never forget who you are." Michael's hands shook as he turned the pages. It wasn't just a notebook, it was a journal filled with letters, drawings, and lists. Dreams Ethan had written for her. Encouragements. Pieces of wisdom. Even jokes to make her laugh on bad days. Emily watched him silently, her eyes glistening. "When I didn't think I could keep going," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I read those pages. It was like he was still there, telling me not to give up." Michael closed the notebook slowly, setting it on the table like something sacred. "Why didn't you come to us?" he asked. "To me? We could have helped you. Ethan's friends, they could have." "He made me promise," Emily interrupted, her voice firm for the first time. He made me swear not to tell anyone. He said the world he came from, it wasn't kind. He didn't want me to get caught up in it. She wiped her sleeve across her face. He wanted me to have a chance. A real one. On my own. Michael stared at her, his mind reeling. How little he had known his own son. Ethan had been living a double life, one of privilege and expectation by day, and quiet acts of kindness by night. And Michael, too absorbed in board meetings and investment portfolios, had missed it all. I want to help you now, he said impulsively. Emily shrank back slightly, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Not charity, Michael clarified quickly. Just, maybe a hand up. For Ethan's sake. Emily hesitated, then slowly nodded. Okay, she whispered. For the first time, a faint flicker of hope crossed her face, so fleeting Michael almost missed it. They talked for another hour, piecing together scraps of Ethan's secret life that Michael had never glimpsed. How he had bought extra meals at diners, tucked cash into forgotten pockets of homeless people sleeping in doorways, sat for hours just listening to people the world ignored. Each story was a gut punch, a reminder that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or penthouses, but in small, invisible acts of love. As midnight approached, Michael offered to have Emily stay the night in the adjoining room of the suite. She looked panicked at first, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of relying on anyone, but exhaustion finally won. She agreed, disappearing into the other room clutching her backpack tightly. Alone, Michael stared out at the dark waters of Elliott Bay, the lights from distant ferries blinking like tired eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a shift was happening, a slow crumbling of the walls he had spent a lifetime building around himself. He thought of Ethan, his wide grin, his stubborn heart. Had he ever really seen his son? Understood him? He thought he was preparing Ethan for the real world, teaching him toughness, ambition, ruthlessness. But maybe Ethan had been preparing for a different world entirely. A better one. One Michael had never known existed. That night, sleep came slowly. Michael lay awake listening to the faint sound of Emily's breathing through the wall, his mind whirling with questions. About the life Ethan had lived. About the secrets Emily still seemed to be holding close to her chest. And about the growing feeling that this story, the story of his son, and the girl he had saved, was far from over. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Morning crept slowly into the suite, the pale Seattle light filtering through the sheer curtains. Michael sat at the small dining table, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands, staring blankly at the muted TV. He hadn't slept much, and when he had, his dreams had been a swirl of Ethan's laughter, Emily's haunted eyes, and the overwhelming sense that he was missing something important. A soft knock at the bedroom door pulled him out of his thoughts. Emily peeked out, looking even smaller in the light of day, her hair messy, her hoodie wrinkled. Michael offered a tired smile and motioned for her to sit. She shuffled over cautiously, clutching the notebook again as if it were a shield. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the distant hum of the city the only sound between them. Finally, Michael leaned forward. Emily, he said gently, I feel like you're still carrying something. Something you're afraid to tell me. Emily's eyes darted to the door as if considering escape. Michael raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Whatever it is, he said, I need to know. For Ethan. For both of us. She hugged the notebook tighter, her knuckles whitening. Then, without looking up, she whispered, Ethan didn't just find me. He was looking for me. Michael's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? Emily blinked back tears. I knew someone was following me for weeks. I thought it was the usual bad luck. Creepy men, dealers, you know. But then Ethan showed up. He said he had been sent to find me. Protect me. Michael felt his stomach twist. Sent? By who? Emily hesitated, the silence stretching so long Michael thought she might back out. Then she finally said, by your wife. Ethan's mother. The words hit like a punch. Michael's heart stumbled in his chest. That's not possible, he croaked. Margaret, she died when Ethan was a teenager. Emily nodded slowly. I know. But Ethan said she had arranged it before she died. She left instructions. Money in a trust. Ethan only found out when he turned 18. And part of that trust's mission was me. Michael leaned back hard in his chair, the room spinning slightly. But why? Oh, you're not. He trailed off, confusion clouding his mind. I'm her daughter, Emily said quietly, her voice barely audible. Illegitimate. She had me before she married you. Gave me up. The words hung in the air, surreal and sharp. Michael felt like he had stepped into a dream he couldn't wake from. He shook his head slowly, disbelief battling with the growing pieces that were suddenly clicking into place. Margaret had always been secretive about her past. There were years she refused to talk about. Friends Michael never met. Trips she took alone. Could it be true? Could he have had a stepdaughter? No, a daughter, living on the streets while he sat in boardrooms and penthouses? I didn't know, Emily said quickly, seeing the storm on his face. I didn't want anything from anyone. I just wanted to survive. She wiped at her eyes angrily. Ethan found me by accident, I think. He figured it out after seeing an old picture of her in a shelter office. Realized I looked like her. That's when he started watching over me. Michael felt sick. All those times he thought Ethan was wasting his potential, throwing away opportunities. He had been fulfilling a promise to a mother they had both lost. Protecting a sister he had never known until it was too late. Why didn't he tell me? Michael asked, his voice cracking. Emily looked at him sadly. He thought you'd be angry? Or worse, not care. Her words stung more than he could bear. He had spent so many years chasing success, thinking he was building a legacy for Ethan. And all along, the real legacy had been slipping through his fingers. Emily reached into her backpack again and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed and creased with time. She pushed it across the table. Ethan wanted you to have this. But only if you knew the truth. With trembling fingers, Michael opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Ethan's handwriting. Dad, family isn't about blood or money. It's about showing up. I hope you'll show up for her. The way you tried for me even when you didn't know how. I love you. I forgive you. Please forgive yourself, Ethan. Tears blurred Michael's vision. He clutched the letter to his chest, his body racked with silent sobs. Emily sat quietly, giving him the space he needed. Outside, the city bustled on, indifferent to the earthquake that had shattered his world inside that suite. After a long time, Michael wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt. He looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw Margaret's eyes staring back at him. Not just her sorrow but her strength. You're not alone anymore, he said hoarsely. You never will be. Emily nodded, her face crumpling with a mixture of relief and grief. In that moment, two broken souls began the slow, painful process of stitching themselves into something whole. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth healing ever was. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, Michael believed that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't too late. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Michael stood by the window, staring out at the streets of Seattle as people hurried to their destinations, umbrellas bobbing through the drizzle. Behind him, Emily sat curled up on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, nervously twirling a string from her sweatshirt. The air between them was heavy, filled with unsaid things, with the overwhelming reality that neither of them really knew where to go from here. Michael wanted to help her, to fix everything, but life wasn't as simple as signing a check or offering a room. Trust, he realized, wasn't something Emily handed out easily, not after a lifetime of betrayals. He turned from the window, forcing a smile that felt heavy on his face. I've made some calls, he said, keeping his voice light. There's a woman I know, Lorraine, who runs a place just outside the city in Redmond. It's a kind of transitional house. They help people get on their feet. Real help, not just handouts. Good people. Safe place. Emily didn't react at first. She just stared at a crack in the coffee table's surface like it might swallow her whole. Michael sat down opposite her, leaning forward. You don't have to decide now. But I thought you might want options. Emily lifted her head slowly, her expression guarded. Why not just stick me in a hotel? Or a fancy apartment? Her voice was flat, almost daring him. Michael sighed. Because an apartment doesn't heal years of being alone. And a hotel room? It's just another place to be lost. He hesitated before adding, this place, it's got counselors. People who've been through it. You wouldn't be alone. Emily dropped her gaze again, her fingers tightening around the string. You don't have to do this, she mumbled. You didn't even know I existed. Michael's heart broke a little more at her words. Maybe I didn't know, he said, but now I do. And that changes everything. The room fell into silence again, punctuated only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. Finally, Emily whispered, I'll think about it. Michael nodded, forcing himself not to push. He had spent his whole life controlling outcomes, closing deals, managing crises, but this wasn't something he could command or buy. He had to wait, to hope she would meet him halfway. The rest of the day passed slowly. They ordered room service, Emily picking at a plate of chicken fingers while Michael pretended to be engrossed in his laptop. He wasn't. He was watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing how she flinched when the door knocked, how she barely touched her food, how she jumped at sudden noises on the television. The signs of a life lived in constant fear were written all over her. That night, Michael barely slept. He spent hours on his phone researching trauma counseling, reading articles about reintegrating homeless youth, and making lists of resources. But underneath all the practical plans was a deeper, gnawing fear. What if he had already failed her before he even had the chance to begin? The next morning dawned gray and cold. Emily was already awake, sitting on the windowsill, staring out at the skyline. Michael poured 2 coffees, setting one quietly beside her. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't push it away either. Small victories, he thought. I'll go, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the stillness. Michael blinked. To Redmond? He asked carefully. Emily nodded, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. But just to see it. No promises. Michael smiled. Fair enough. By mid-morning they were in his Tesla, gliding through the damp streets and out toward the suburbs. Emily pressed herself against the passenger door, staring out like she might need to bolt at any moment. Michael kept the radio low, a soft background of classic rock filling the silence. He wanted to tell her it was okay to be scared, that he was scared too, but the words felt clumsy in his mouth, so he just drove. The house in Redmond was a large, renovated colonial-style home set back from the street, surrounded by towering evergreens. A painted sign above the porch read The Haven. Lorraine, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, greeted them warmly. She didn't push Emily with hugs or questions. She just offered her a tour, walking through cozy common areas, neat bedrooms, a bright kitchen that smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon. We have rules, Lorraine said gently. But we also have second chances. Third if needed. Emily didn't say much during the tour, but Michael noticed the way her eyes lingered on a sunlit reading nook, the small art studio tucked into the back, the bulletin board covered with Polaroids of smiling faces. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt real, warm, lived-in, human. Afterward, they sat on the front steps, the soft murmur of other residents drifting from inside. I can stay? Emily asked Lorraine, her voice cracking slightly. Lorraine smiled. You can stay as long as you need. Michael watched as Emily wrestled with herself, the push and pull of fear and hope visible on her face. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Michael felt tears sting his eyes but blinked them back. I'll check in, he promised. Not to pressure you. Just to see how you're doing. Emily gave him a hesitant, fragile smile. Okay. As he drove away, Michael glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Emily standing on the porch, Lorraine's hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He felt a strange mixture of pride and grief, pride that she was strong enough to take this step, grief for all the years they had lost. But for the first time since Ethan's funeral, he felt something else too. Hope. Small, flickering but real. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of a different one. The first few days at the Haven were harder for Emily than she had expected. Although everyone around her was kind and welcoming, she carried her defenses like armor, unsure of when she might need to protect herself again. Lorraine introduced her to the routine gently, chores in the morning, group sessions in the afternoon, shared dinners in the evening, but it still felt overwhelming. At night, Emily lay awake in her small but cozy room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the house and the soft footsteps of other residents. Sleep, when it came, was restless, filled with fragmented memories of alleyways, cold nights, and whispered threats in the dark. Meanwhile, Michael returned to his empty house in Queen Anne Hill. It should have felt like home, but now it felt cavernous and hollow, every polished surface a reminder of Ethan's absence. Michael sat alone in the living room most nights, nursing a glass of whiskey he barely touched, scrolling through old photos of Ethan on his phone. His son's smile haunted him, easy, bright, full of life, and he wondered how he had missed so much going wrong. Guilt gnawed at him constantly, a low ache he couldn't ignore. He kept busy by immersing himself in work during the day, but no amount of meetings or contracts could distract him fully. 3 days after dropping Emily off, Michael made his first visit back to the Haven. He brought a bag of books he thought she might like and a box of art supplies he picked up from a store downtown after remembering how her eyes had lit up briefly during the tour when she saw the studio. Lorraine met him at the door, her face kind but serious. She's having a tough adjustment, Lorraine said softly. It's normal. Trust isn't something she hands out easily. Michael nodded, his throat tight. Can I see her? Emily was out back, sitting on an old wooden bench beneath a maple tree that was just beginning to turn gold with the early hints of fall. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a baggy sweater, knees pulled up to her chest. Michael approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said quietly. Emily glanced up, her face unreadable. "Hey," she replied, voice guarded. He sat down at a respectful distance, setting the bags beside him. "I brought you some things. No pressure to keep them. Just thought you might like them." Emily eyed the bags warily, then after a moment reached for the one with books. She rifled through the titles, The Outsiders, Of Mice and Men into the Wild, pausing briefly on each one. A flicker of something, maybe appreciation, passed across her face before her mask slipped back into place. "Thanks," she muttered. They sat in silence for a while, the wind stirring fallen leaves around their feet. Finally Emily spoke. "I don't know how to be normal," she said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear. "I don't know how to live like these people." Michael swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "There's no such thing as normal," he said gently. "Everyone here has a story. You're not alone." Emily shook her head fiercely. "It's different. They had families. Or at least someone who cared. I had no one. I don't know how to trust this." Her voice cracked, the words spilling out faster, like a dam breaking. "I don't know how to believe it won't all be ripped away again." Michael wanted desperately to tell her it would never happen, that he would make sure of it. But he knew promises like that were dangerous things, especially to someone who had been broken by too many already. Instead he said, "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to take your time." Emily turned her face away, blinking back tears. After a long pause she whispered, "Why are you doing this? You didn't even know me." Michael stared at the ground, searching for the right words. Maybe because I failed my son," he said quietly. "Maybe because I can't go back and fix what I missed with Ethan. But maybe I can do better now. Maybe I can show up for someone who needs it." Emily was silent, absorbing his words. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. It wasn't forgiveness or trust, not yet. But it was something, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of pink and gold, Michael rose to leave. "I'll be back," he promised. "Whenever you're ready to talk. Or if you just want someone to sit with." Emily didn't answer, but she didn't tell him not to come back either. Michael took that as enough for now. Over the next week he visited every other day, sometimes bringing small things. An old denim jacket he found that he thought she might like, a playlist of music she could listen to, even a simple sketchpad. Sometimes Emily would sit with him. Other times she stayed inside, peeking out from a window. But each time she seemed a little less tense, a little more willing to believe he might really stick around. One afternoon, Lorraine pulled Michael aside after his visit. "She's asking about you when you're not here," she said with a small smile. "She won't admit it, but she's starting to trust you." Michael felt a swell of hope rise in his chest. It was slow, painstaking progress, but it was real. Maybe healing wasn't about grand gestures or instant fixes. Maybe it was about showing up, again and again, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. As he drove back into Seattle, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky, Michael realized something else. This journey he had started with Emily wasn't just about saving her. It was saving him too. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The first real test of trust came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, just as the crisp autumn air in Seattle turned cold enough to make every breath visible. Michael had been feeling good about the slow but steady progress with Emily, but that afternoon he got a call from Lorraine that sent a jolt of panic through him. "She's missing," Lorraine said, her voice tight with worry. "She didn't come back after her art session at the community center." Michael felt his heart plummet. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and keys and sped toward the haven, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the torrential rain. His mind raced with horrible scenarios. Emily back on the streets, vulnerable, scared, hurt. When he arrived, Lorraine was already organizing a small search effort among the staff and volunteers. Michael insisted on checking the parks nearby first, knowing from his conversations with Emily that she sometimes felt overwhelmed and sought out open spaces when she needed to breathe. He drove slowly through Volunteer Park, scanning every bench, every shadow, hoping desperately to catch a glimpse of her. He found her finally, curled up on the damp ground beneath a large oak tree, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her head down. Rain had soaked through her sweater and jeans, and she was shivering uncontrollably. Michael pulled over so quickly he almost hit the curb. He ran to her, ignoring the cold water pooling in his shoes. "Emily," he called, kneeling beside her. She didn't move at first, didn't even look up. Only when he placed a hand gently on her shoulder did she flinch and raise her tear-streaked face to him. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly. "I didn't mean to run. I felt like I couldn't breathe." Michael's chest ached at the raw panic in her voice. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're okay now. I'm here." Carefully, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her. She was so cold it scared him. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms. She was so light it felt like carrying a bundle of twigs. Emily didn't protest. She simply rested her head against his shoulder, exhausted. He got her back to his car, cranked the heat up, and drove her back to the Haven. Lorraine met them at the door with a blanket and a cup of hot tea. Emily sat silently on the couch, wrapped tightly, her hands trembling around the mug. Michael knelt in front of her, speaking gently. "You don't have to explain," he said. "But if you want to talk about it, I'll listen." For a long time, Emily said nothing. She stared at the steam rising from her tea, her face pale and tight with emotion. Finally, in a halting voice, she said, "I used to go to the park when things got bad, when my stepdad would, when home didn't feel safe. It was the only place I could go where no one would bother me." Michael listened without interrupting, every word carving itself into his heart. Today, the art class, someone smelled like him. Like cigarettes and beer. It hit me like a punch. I just had to get out. I didn't even think, I just ran. Michael nodded, understanding in a way he hadn't expected. Trauma wasn't logical. It was a wound that reopened without warning, triggered by a smell, a sound, a memory. "You did the best you could," he said quietly. "You survived. That's what matters." Emily finally looked up at him, her eyes wide and searching. "Are you mad?" she asked, her voice so small it nearly broke him. "No, Emily. I'm not mad. I'm proud of you for coming back. Even if it took a little while." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away angrily as if ashamed of showing weakness. Michael reached out, not touching her, but holding his hand open in an invitation. Slowly, hesitantly, Emily reached out and placed her small hand in his. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a surrender. A fragile acceptance that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't going to leave. Michael squeezed her hand gently, reassuringly, then let go. Lorraine suggested Emily get some rest, and Emily didn't argue. As Michael left the Haven that night, the rain easing into a gentle mist, he felt something inside him shift. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about redemption for past mistakes. This was about love. The kind that wasn't flashy or easy but was built one brick at a time through trust, patience, and showing up on the worst days. In the days that followed, Emily seemed quieter, more introspective. She spent hours in the art room, losing herself in painting. Michael visited as often as he could, sometimes bringing lunch, sometimes just sitting nearby while she worked. He never pushed her to talk but was simply there, a steady presence. One afternoon, as he watched her paint a vivid sunset over the ocean, she said without looking up, "I used to dream about running away to California. Living by the beach. No one to tell me what to do. Just the sound of the waves." Michael smiled. "That sounds beautiful," he said. "Maybe someday you can still do that. On your own terms." Emily glanced at him, a small, genuine smile flickering across her face for the first time. "Maybe," she whispered. Michael realized then that dreams didn't die just because life had been hard. They got buried sometimes, crushed under the weight of survival. But given time and safety and a little bit of hope, they could come back to life. As the sun set over Seattle that evening, painting the sky in colors even more brilliant than Emily's canvas, Michael allowed himself, for the first time in a long while, to hope too. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. A week after the night Emily ran away to the park, something happened that neither Michael nor anyone at the Haven could have anticipated. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and Michael had stopped by with breakfast sandwiches and coffee, a new tradition he had formed with Emily. She met him at the door, looking brighter than she had in days, her hair brushed and her canvas tote slung over one shoulder. "I have something to show you," she said, a sparkle in her voice. Curious, Michael followed her to the art room, where she pointed proudly at a new painting she had finished. It was a portrait, not of a person but of a scene. Two figures sitting on a bench by the ocean, one older and tired-looking, the other young and full of life, their hands almost touching. Michael stared at it for a long moment, a lump forming in his throat. "That's beautiful," he said honestly. "Is that us?" Emily gave a little laugh and shrugged. "Maybe." They spent the morning together, easy conversation flowing between them like a gentle current. But just as Michael was getting ready to leave, Lorraine came rushing into the room, her face pale. "Michael," she said urgently, "There's someone here to see Emily, and I think you need to be there too." Confused, Michael followed her to the lobby where a woman stood wringing her hands. She looked about 40 with neatly styled blonde hair, a sharp pantsuit and an anxious air about her. When she saw Emily, her face broke into an expression that was almost painful to witness, part relief, part sorrow. "Emily?" she said in a trembling voice. Emily froze, the color draining from her face. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you. My name is Denise Parker. I work with Child Protective Services in Olympia. I've been looking for you for almost a year." Michael's head spun. He glanced at Emily, who looked like she was about to bolt. Lorraine stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on the girl's shoulder. "Why were you looking for her?" Michael asked, his voice hard. Denise swallowed, pulling a folder from her bag and holding it out to him. "Emily isn't who you think she is," she said softly. "Her real name is Emily Davis. She was reported missing last September. Her case went cold because there was no family left to claim her. Her mother died 3 years ago. Her father, well, he wasn't fit to raise her. She's been on her own ever since." Michael took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photos, school pictures of a younger Emily, smiling shyly at the camera, a birth certificate listing her birthplace as Spokane, Washington, and police reports documenting years of neglect and abuse. Michael felt sick as he read through them. This wasn't just a troubled kid who had fallen through the cracks. This was a girl who had been abandoned over and over, left to fend for herself in a world that had shown her very little kindness. Emily stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. "I don't want to go back," she said fiercely. "You can't make me. I'm not going back to another shelter. I'm not going back to people who don't care." Denise shook her head quickly. "We're not trying to send you to a shelter. We're trying to find you a real home. Someone who actually wants you." Michael knelt down so he could look Emily in the eye. "Emily," he said gently, "no one's going to make you do anything you don't want. But maybe it's time to let people help you." Tears filled Emily's eyes and she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. After a long, tense moment, she whispered, "The only people who ever wanted me were the ones who hurt me." The words hit Michael like a hammer. He stood up and faced Denise. "What happens now?" he asked. Denise looked uncertain. "If Emily's willing, we can start a process to find her a foster placement. Someone stable. Someone approved." Michael hesitated, the words on the tip of his tongue before he even realized he was going to say them. What if I wanted to be that someone? The room went completely silent. Lorraine's eyes widened. Denise looked stunned. Emily turned slowly to stare at him, hope and terror battling across her face. "You?" she said in a broken whisper. Michael nodded. "If you'll have me," he said simply. Denise recovered first. "Mr. Hargrove, fostering isn't something you just decide on the spot. It's a whole process. Background checks, home studies, training." Michael smiled grimly. "Then let's start it. Today. Whatever it takes." He turned to Emily. "I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. But I can promise you this, you'll never have to wonder if you're wanted." For a long moment, Emily just stared at him, her lower lip trembling. Then she crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked the breath out of him. Michael held her tightly, his eyes stinging. Lorraine sniffled audibly and even Denise had to wipe at her eyes. It wasn't the end of the road. Not by a long shot. But it was the beginning of something neither of them had dared to dream of. A real family built not by blood but by choice. As they sat together in the little lobby of the Haven, while the rain began to fall again outside, Michael knew that finding Emily hadn't just been a twist of fate. It had been a rescue for both of them. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Michael had always thought that wealth smoothed the path to almost everything in life. Business deals, opportunities, even relationships. But as he stood in the hallway of the Washington State Department of Children, Youth and Families office in Seattle, filling out forms under fluorescent lights, he realized that money couldn't accelerate love or trust, nor could it fast-forward a broken system that required time and scrutiny. He glanced sideways at Emily, who sat on a blue vinyl chair nearby, nervously peeling the label off her water bottle. She had been quieter these past few days, ever since that afternoon at the Haven when Michael had offered to become her guardian. It was as if the weight of possibly belonging somewhere had confused her more than being alone ever had. Michael couldn't blame her. Trust was a complicated thing for a girl who had spent years surviving people who claimed they cared. Denise had been kind but firm. "This won't be quick, Mr. Hargrove. You'll need a home study, background clearance, interviews." There's training too. Parenting a teenager, especially one who's experienced trauma, isn't easy. Michael had nodded and accepted every word. He knew nothing about parenting a child like Emily, but he had a quiet certainty that learning how to do it was the most important thing he'd ever commit to. The first home visit was scheduled for a Thursday. A social worker named Paula arrived promptly at 3 p.m., clipboard in hand, and surveyed every room of his Bellevue home with clinical precision. She asked about everything: how often he traveled, who lived with him, where Emily would sleep, how he'd manage school, therapy, meals. Michael answered her questions with an honesty that surprised even himself. He didn't try to sugarcoat his past with Caleb, the distance between them, the regrets he carried like silent luggage. Paula seemed satisfied by the end of the visit, though she offered no promises. "It's clear you care deeply," she said. "But care has to be backed with structure. Emily will need consistency, and healing takes longer than most people are ready for." That evening, Michael found Emily in the guest room that was slowly becoming her space. She had pinned one of her paintings on the wall, a moonlit street with a single figure walking toward the light. "Do you like it?" she asked without turning around. "I do," Michael said gently. "It feels hopeful." Emily smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I knew what hope looked like. I used to paint only dark things. Cities on fire. Girls underwater. Then something changed." She turned to him, her eyes vulnerable. "You didn't give up on me when you could have walked away." Michael felt his throat tighten. "Neither did you," he said quietly. School was the next big hurdle. Denise had helped arrange an interview at a public high school in Bellevue where the guidance counselor, a thoughtful woman named Mrs. Elliott, had offered to ease Emily into classes mid-semester. "We'll take it slow," she promised. "Half days at first. Some art electives. A social skills group." Emily was skeptical, but she agreed. On her first day, she wore jeans, a sweatshirt, and carried a worn sketchbook like a shield. Michael drove her to the front of the school, and she hesitated at the door. "What if no one talks to me?" she asked. "Then talk to yourself," he said. "You've survived worse than silence." She gave a soft laugh and disappeared inside. That afternoon, when he picked her up, she was quieter than usual. But later, over dinner, she mentioned a girl named Jamie who sat next to her in art and liked her drawing. It was a small detail, but to Michael it was huge. As weeks passed, so did the evaluations. Michael attended parenting classes in the evenings, where he sat next to other hopeful foster parents and listened to stories of resilience, heartbreak, and patience. He learned about trauma bonding, emotional flashbacks, and how children sometimes test love just to see if it's real. He read books, spoke with therapists, and kept showing up. At home, he and Emily developed routines. Sunday morning pancakes. Wednesday library visits. Quiet movie nights. Sometimes she would have nightmares and knock on his door, asking if she could sit nearby. He never asked what the dream was. He just made space for her and stayed present. Then one day, a letter arrived from the department. He opened it at the kitchen table while Emily was doing homework. It was an official notice. His application to become Emily's legal foster guardian had been approved. His hands trembled slightly as he read it. Emily looked up from across the room. "What is it?" He held out the paper to her. "It's happening," he said simply. She took the paper, scanned it, and looked back at him. Her face didn't show excitement at first, just disbelief, like someone expecting the ground to vanish under their feet. "You really did it," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected her. She walked over slowly and gave him a careful, almost uncertain hug. "You're the first person who didn't leave," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. That night, Michael sat alone on the back porch after Emily went to bed, looking up at the stars above the Seattle skyline. He thought of Caleb, of all the questions left unanswered, of the pain that still lived between memory and silence. He would never get those years back with his son, but maybe this was something different. Not a second chance, but a new path altogether. Emily had walked into his life at a moment when he thought he was done feeling anything deeply. Now, every day felt like a heartbeat he didn't want to miss. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Michael hadn't expected everyone to understand. He knew that much. But he hadn't realized just how deeply the ripples would run when word got out that he had taken in a teenage girl, especially a homeless one, someone with no family name, no social standing, no clear history. It began innocently enough. Comments at the country club in Bellevue where Michael sometimes still met former business partners for lunch. Over grilled salmon and iced tea, Craig Henderson leaned in and said half-jokingly, "You've got a big heart, Mike. But taking in some random kid off the streets? Sounds risky." Michael had forced a laugh and changed the subject, but the words stayed lodged in his mind like a thorn. Worse were the whispers he couldn't hear directly, but which circled back to him through acquaintances and old friends. That Michael was having a midlife crisis, that he was trying to replace Caleb, that he didn't know what he was doing. Even Martha, Caleb's mother and Michael's ex-wife, requested a meeting over coffee at a cafe near Green Lake Park. Martha was the same as ever, controlled, polished, speaking in calm, measured tones. "I'm not criticizing," she said after stirring her latte 3 times, "but I just want to be sure you're thinking clearly. Taking care of a traumatized teenager isn't like writing a check, Michael. It's messy. It's complicated. You're grieving. I don't want you making decisions you might regret." Michael had listened, patient but unmoved. He understood Martha's concerns, but what she didn't see was that this wasn't about filling a void. It was about recognizing a human soul that needed a place to land, and realizing he needed it just as much. Meanwhile, Emily was building a fragile life brick by brick. She had joined the school's art club and entered a local youth art competition held downtown in Seattle. One Friday afternoon she came home bubbling with something she was trying not to show too openly. "Mrs. Elliott said they're featuring my painting in the exhibit next month," she said, sliding into her seat at the kitchen island. Michael smiled broadly. "That's incredible, Emily. What's the painting about?" She shrugged a little, almost shy. "It's called Becoming. Just kind of about me, I guess. About changing without knowing if it's good or bad, just changing because you have to." Michael felt something heavy lift off his chest. He was seeing it now, the slow transformation, the hope returning to her eyes, the confidence sneaking back into her posture. But not everything went smoothly. One evening, while Michael was cleaning up after dinner, he overheard Emily talking in the backyard on her cell phone, her voice tense. "I told you I can't. I'm not going back there. I don't care what you say." The words sliced through the night air. Michael didn't press her when she came back inside, but later that night she knocked softly on his door. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. He set aside his laptop and nodded. She sat at the edge of the bed, pulling her knees up to her chest. "It was someone from the shelter. A girl I used to hang with. She's in trouble. Drugs, bad people. She wanted me to come with her." Her voice broke slightly. "I wanted to for a second. Not because I missed that life. But because it's easy. No expectations. No people getting disappointed when you screw up." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision you make when no one's watching. You chose to stay. That's courage." Their bond deepened with moments like that, honest, messy, imperfect moments where neither tried to pretend they had all the answers. Emily started calling him Mike, casually, then one day, without realizing it, slipped and called him Dad in front of Mrs. Elliott. They both froze, but Michael smiled and said nothing, pretending not to notice. Later that evening, Emily mumbled, "Sorry?" That just came out. Michael only said, "I didn't mind." The silence that followed was full, not empty. In early spring, Michael decided to take Emily on a trip to Portland, Oregon. A short drive, but far enough to feel like an adventure. They walked along the river, visited Powell's Books, and sat at a tiny cafe where Emily sketched people coming and going. At one point, while Michael sipped his coffee, Emily slid a sheet of paper across the table. It was a rough sketch of 2 figures standing side by side, one larger, protective, the other smaller but growing taller. Above them, faint in pencil, she had written, "Home is a person." Michael stared at it for a long time, unable to speak. That night in the hotel, he framed the sketch with the cheap wood frame they bought at a local shop and hung it in the corner of the room. When they returned to Bellevue, the house felt different. Not just a place they lived, but a place they belonged to. Emily's room was full of her art now, her laughter sometimes bouncing down the hallways. Michael's study had one corner filled with her school projects and half-finished paintings. The emptiness that had once made the house echo now hummed with life. Still, Michael knew that healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, moments when old fears rose like ghosts. But they weren't alone anymore. They had each other. And somehow that was enough. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in Bellevue when everything changed. Michael had just returned from a meeting downtown, shaking the rain from his coat as he entered the house. He found Emily sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, her hands clutching a letter. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously between him and the paper she held. Without a word, she handed it to him. Michael opened it, sensing the weight of whatever news it carried. It was an official-looking document from the Washington Department of Social and Health Services. It stated that a woman named Patricia Lane had come forward, claiming to be Emily's biological grandmother, and was petitioning for custody. Michael's mind raced. Emily had never spoken of any family. She had always said she had no one. He looked up, meeting her terrified gaze. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I swear, Mike, I thought they didn't want me. I thought they were gone." Michael sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He reached for her hand. "We'll figure this out. Together." But the days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, legal consultations, and heart-wrenching conversations. It turned out Patricia had been searching for Emily for years, but a series of administrative errors, foster system miscommunications, and Emily's own disappearing act had kept them apart. Patricia lived in Spokane, Washington, and had only recently learned that Emily was alive and safe. When asked by the court if she wanted to go, Emily's face crumpled. "I don't even know her," she said in a trembling voice. Michael squeezed her hand. "It's your choice. No one's forcing you." Finally, the day came when Patricia visited Bellevue. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a sadness that clung to her like an invisible cloak. They met at a local diner, and Michael watched from a distance as Emily and Patricia talked. There were tears, awkward pauses, and tentative smiles. Afterward, Emily slid into the passenger seat of Michael's car, silent for a long moment. "She seems nice," she finally said. "But she's a stranger. You're not." Michael's heart tightened. He didn't know what the future held, but hearing that was enough for now. The court allowed Emily to choose. She decided to stay with Michael and have a slow, supervised relationship with Patricia. It wasn't a rejection of her past but an acceptance of her present. She wanted to move forward, not backward. Months later, as spring unfolded into a soft, hopeful summer, Emily stood proudly in her graduation gown on a sunlit field at Bellevue High School. Michael sat in the front row, his heart nearly bursting with pride. When she walked across the stage to accept her diploma, she caught his eye and smiled, a smile that said everything words never could. After the ceremony, they celebrated at home with a small group of friends and neighbors who had come to love Emily as one of their own. At one point, Emily pulled Michael aside and handed him a small, wrapped box. Inside was a silver key on a chain. "You gave me a home," she said quietly. "Now you always have the key to mine too." Tears filled Michael's eyes, but he blinked them away, laughing softly as he pulled her into a hug. They stood like that for a long moment, knowing that life would never be perfect but it would be real and full and theirs. Emily eventually enrolled at the University of Washington, majoring in social work, determined to help kids who had stories like hers. Michael, too, found a renewed sense of purpose, volunteering at shelters and funding programs for homeless youth. Caleb's death had shattered him once, but somehow, through all the unexpected turns, love had found a way to rebuild what grief had tried to destroy. In the end, it wasn't about saving someone else, it was about saving each other. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.